Permit me to begin with a grim panorama. In August 2018, a Colorado man named Christopher Watts reported that his pregnant wife Shanann and their 2 young daughters had vanished from their suburban home. He pleaded for their safe return, turning tearful eyes to the television cameras. Yet not long thereafter, shockingly sooner than some might predict, the foulest truth emerged. He himself had murdered them. That's the broad strokes for those uninitiated to this tragedy. The specific details remain haunting. 2 little girls robbed of life, a pregnant mother, and a father whose freewheeling lies unravelled in mere days. Now, at first blush, you might say it is not surprising that, in the year of our Lord 2018, a father who claims his family simply disappeared would quickly come under the rigorous scrutiny of law enforcement. But the velocity with which Christopher Watts was unmasked is practically breakneck. Indeed, from the very first interview transcript, before we arrive at the polygraph meltdown or his eventual confession, one can already detect the stench of guilt swirling about him. It is that first snippet that concerns me here. The initial portion of Christopher Watts's conversation with the FBI's Special Agent Graham Coder on August 14, 2018. Without so much as sampling the second half, where his story crumbles completely, one can almost see in the man's words and demeanour the entire edifice of unholy deception. Let us examine how and why. From the vantage of a modestly literate skeptic, even a cursory read through that first interview text is enough to set alarm bells clanging. Here we have a man who, at best, recites colourless details about the children's lunches, the times he leaves for work, the precise hour he preps a protein shake, all while showcasing the emotional resonance of a used teabag. When pressed on the actual disappearance of his wife and 2 daughters, our dear Mr. Watts can produce nothing beyond watery speculation, something about maybe she went to decompress or she took the kids to a friend's. The inertness is staggering. Even if you see that not every father in crisis displays frantic hysteria, the dissonance between a father's paternal obligations and Chris's near-bureaucratic recitation of domestic chores truly defies normal comprehension. It is as though he printed off a to-do list from his smartphone and read from it, failing to produce even a single heartfelt reflection on the horror of a mother and toddlers who vanish into thin air. Add to this the preternatural calm with which he fields each question, interspersed with those oh-so-telling disclaimers, I promise, I swear, I wouldn't ever hurt them, sir, etc. And you have an eerie collage that suggests a pathological attempt at image control. So often an interviewer might say, I see, do you have any idea who might have taken them? And the typical anguished father either leaps to guess a million improbable scenarios or he begs, pleads, and demands more urgent police action. Watts, by contrast, offers either anemically mild acceptance or recites more mechanical details. Went to 319 site, replaced some lines, as if the entire matter of the presumably kidnapped mother and children is overshadowed by the day's errands. So ironically sterile that one wonders if he is mentally referencing a script. Now the cunning or conspiratorially minded might argue, but people grieve differently. Indeed, some do. People in shock occasionally exhibit a horrifying near-catatonic calm. Yes, all that can be true. But it's not just calm that he evinces, it's the systematic attempt at narrative curation, hyper-specifics about day-to-day fatherly tasks, deadened or missing emotional content, and no real hunger for the answers one expects from a genuine innocent. Let the first portion of that transcript stand as a miniature masterpiece in the annals of incriminating complacency. It is practically the Rosetta Stone for subtle self-condemnation. Rather than letting this discussion end with a mere how did he do it, or why is he suspicious, I turn to a more enthralling possibility, the power of advanced AI, namely large language models, to dissect suspect statements. We find ourselves in the early stages of an epoch where we can feed entire interview transcripts to sophisticated machine learning systems, which can analyze with unerring stamina the microlinguistic cues of deception. Christopher Watts's softly pivoting pronouns, the uncharacteristic leaps in tense usage, the suspiciously repetitive disclaimers, these stand out to a patient human observer, but they stand out with neon clarity to a well-trained neural network. Indeed, we can foresee the day when such interrogations are automatically streamed into an AI that flags each suspicious syntactic quirk, Notice the subject's unusual shift to past tense when referencing his children. Or observe how frequently "I don't know" clusters around certain topics, suggesting purposeful evasion. The machine never tires of data. It does not lose focus because the suspect is wearing a pleasant expression or sobbing. It looks only to the structure of the statements, the patterns of logic, the rhetorical scaffolding that might not stand up to real scrutiny. This is not mere science fiction. Every year, the sophistication of these language models advances, and with it the potential that investigators, lawyers, and yes, possibly even jurors, may find themselves guided by an algorithmic breakdown of the suspect's testimony. The model sees a 94% likelihood that the suspect is concealing direct knowledge of the victim's whereabouts, it might say. Those ums and likes that cluster around certain topics, the abrupt shifts in pronoun usage, these might be the new fingerprints left on the suspect's story. If you, dear reader, quake at the notion of a machine scanning your statements for guilt, you would not be alone. Nor would you be foolish, for this future raises a host of pressing concerns about due process, privacy rights, the constitutional presumption of innocence. But the unstoppable tide of technology cannot be reversed by hand-wringing. Society must adapt. In the older sense, one might imagine, I can outsmart a polygraph if I just control my breathing or use some cunning mental trick. But the future AI polygraph, for lack of a better term, is not measuring heart rate alone. It is measuring the architecture of your entire statement. It is counting the times you say "we" instead of "I." It is mapping your synonyms, your hedging language, your abrupt changes of topic. Every word might become a data point, which begs the question, what is a suspect to do? A cunning suspect might vow to keep the story so minimal that there is nothing to pass. But at a certain point, that minimal response begins to look suspicious in its own right. Conversely, the moment you open your mouth, you expose yourself to computerized textual analysis far beyond the scrutiny of old-fashioned detectives. The only sure refuge, ironically, may be a stony silence. Indeed, the solemn admonition, "you have the right to remain silent," may morph into, "you'd be mad to speak at all," under the unblinking gaze of an AI. We might see a new era in which suspects and their lawyers consider even more carefully the ramifications of each uttered sentence. Returning to Christopher Watts, let it be noted that, in the first half of his FBI interview alone, we already see enough suspicious points that the possibility of innocence grows faint indeed. Why does he not show the normal cues of desperation? Why does he spin elaborate disclaimers in moments that should be spontaneously sorrowful? Why does he fixate on mechanical chores, leaving the most emotional topic, his missing wife and children, virtually unaddressed? Over and over, the transcript reveals a man who seems more worried about how he appears than how to help the search. One could simply say, yes, well, that's an indication he's guilty. But from an AI vantage, we have a methodical taxonomy of his linguistic patterns, the scripted timeline, the passive voice about the children, the peculiar tension in pronoun usage, and so on. The deeper we peer, the more unmasked his guilt becomes, long before we approach the polygraph exam or the final admission. So in the future scenario, imagine plugging that transcript snippet into a specialized forensic language model. Perhaps a blinking highlight would appear. High deception index, 85%, enough to send chills through any suspect who believes he can talk his way out by reeling off a careful alibi. The old disclaimers, the contrived chronological detail, these do not fool a computational system that has devoured tens of thousands of real statements from criminals, innocents, and everyone in between, then found precisely which speech habits correlate with lying about a crime. Christopher Watts's peculiar performance in that single chunk of transcript stands as a mini case study for how an apparently calm facade can be undone by the very details he so vigorously recites. One sees that a detective, or any alert reader, can glean enough from just those early lines to call the entire story into doubt. That he ultimately failed a polygraph and confessed is not surprising. Even if we never learned of that second half, we would be justified in suspecting him from the first. Now project that scenario onto the horizon, where tomorrow's investigators might not even rely on purely human ears and eyes. The new day belongs to robust language models armed with advanced algorithms parsing each suspect's grammar, searching for the telltale patterns. For criminals, the risk of self-incrimination by mere speech intensifies exponentially. so too does the impetus for the rest of us, guilty or innocent, to consider carefully our words. The sweet old notion of "I'll just talk my way out of it with an easy lie" becomes a near impossibility if the lie is read by an unblinking, unnatural intelligence that sees every crack in your rhetorical armor. The only surefire protective measure remains the classic lawyerly advice: say nothing and let your attorney do the talking, an attorney presumably less prone to slip in pronoun usage or flail in the presence of advanced AI cross-examination. So yes, remain silent, suspect, or speak openly at your peril. The choice is yours, but the old days where one might hold firm to the illusions that a calm demeanor or meticulously memorized timeline can outfox the state's investigative apparatus are fading rapidly. In the end, Christopher Watts is merely a cautionary example. He believed he could spin a mundane, step-by-step version of events. The truth found its way through the cracks. And soon enough, I suspect, the truth, under the watchful, inexhaustible scrutiny of artificially intelligent systems, will find its way through everyone's cracks. Better, then, to keep one's mouth shut altogether, lest you deliver your conscience and your guilt on a platter.